So when I came to Ross, I kind of told myself, like, all right, books, job, that's it. That's the only thing we will do here. And I was pleasantly surprised to discover that there is a lot more to Ross than books and recruiting. It takes a little bit of balance to know like how much of each you really want to do. So that was, I guess, a unique challenge that I faced. But I remember John Brown at the beginning of the semester. He had been kind of a voice of reason throughout the entire application process at Ross. And at the beginning of the semester, he said to me, look, you're going to have your academic life, your social life, your personal life, like personal health, and your recruiting life. And it's a four-legged stool. And you can either chop off all of the legs and still have a stable but much shorter stool, kind of unfulfilled, or remember that a three-legged stool can still stand on its own, and sometimes you have to put one away and pick one up and put another one down and pick one up. And that was unbelievably invaluable advice for me to realize I have certain needs in each of those kind of four different lifestyles, and understanding like I don't have to do all four at the exact same time.
Welcome to Business Beyond Usual. My name is Arpit Sharma, and we are recording live from the Ross School of Business once again. Today, we are again talking about Voices of Ross. We loved our discussion the last time so much that we wanted to come back and talk more with our guests. Before we get started, we want to encourage you to get in touch. We always love engaging with our listeners, and we love to hear from you. Send us a message at bbupodcast@umich.edu. Again, that's bbupodcast@umich.edu. Follow us on Instagram at Ross_BBU. Again, that's Ross_BBU. And feel free to DM us there as well. Ask us questions, suggest episode topics, or just say hello. A quick note for our listeners. This episode is all about some Ross students sharing their intimate stories and experiences. For those of you who did not listen to our first part of the Voices of Ross episode, we encourage you to listen to the first part as well. To give our listeners some background, we have several events at Ross where students choose to speak about their life experiences and stories. The audience for these events is the students of University of Michigan. Ross does a great job of creating a supportive environment such that the speakers can share intimate stories, and the audience often walks out of these events learning something new, not just about their classmates, but also about themselves. As I mentioned, Ross gives multiple opportunities for students to speak up in front of a large audience. Picture an auditorium filled with hundreds of students. And there's several events, again, out here. One of them is VetX, which is focused on the veteran community at Ross. There's another event called OutX, which is focused on the LGBTQ community. There's International X. There's East Meets West. Both of these are targeted towards internationals and Asian Americans. There's another event that's called First at Ross, where first-generation college students share their life experiences. And another headline event of Sanger Leadership Center is the Story Lab, where students learn how to tell a story from professionals. And Sanger gives them the opportunity to share those stories either through a podcast or live in an auditorium. This event has speakers from all over the University of Michigan. And to get started, as I mentioned, today we have some brave speakers who are sharing their personal stories and thoughts on this podcast. We will start with introductions, but we'll keep it quick this time. And I would love to know something that people normally do not know about you. What would you share?
Yeah, I can open up here. Mark O'Connell again. There's a number of stories, and I guess like the Ross community knows a bunch of these already, but one of them is that I was a two-time all-conference wrestler in college at USC.
Wow. I'm not impressed.
Yeah, no, I figured Becca wouldn't be impressed. That usually gets a good hit with some people.
I did not expect that.
Yeah, Christian Beckler, MBA 2. I also spoke at VetX. Something that a lot of people don't know about me is my sport in college was skydiving, actually.
That's a sport?
Not impressed.
So, nor should you be. But yeah, so I got to compete at a collegiate level, do a lot of demonstrations, a lot of stuff that I probably wouldn't repeat today. But I got to jump out of a hot air balloon on Christmas with my mom watching, so that was cool.
Wait, what does competitive skydiving look like?
Oh man, there's like a whole bunch of events. Like there's formation events where you have to build a formation as quick as possible from like the second the first person jumps out of the airplane to the second the last person makes the formation. There's ones where teams of 4 get like a list of formations they have to do in rapid succession, and each one that they do is 1 point. There's accuracy events where you're actually landing on a like sensor pad that's measuring your score in centimeters from dead center. And so your team score is like, it's golf rules. So the lowest score is best. So there's a lot of different events.
And I'm assuming the judges are flying down with you, because how else would they?
Yeah. So obviously the accuracy one's really easy. Cause you have a scoreboard that your score appears on as you're touching that sensor. And so that's ground-based judging. But then for the formation stuff, you have a cameraman that jumps out with you and they record your jump, and then the judges watch it and tally up your scores there. But like they put it out on this like big screen, and you can watch little ticks as they're giving you points, because they have to have a certain consensus if you get a point for every single one of those. So you never quite know if you did it right or not. But yeah.
That's very cool.
What was the height you were jumping from?
Usually like 13,500 feet.
And that's how you practice, like repeatedly jumping from 13,000 feet?
That, or at West Point, they have like a big open plain, they called it the plain. It's a giant grassy lawn. And so we would jump out of a helicopter from like 4,000 or 5,000 feet, usually to do like demonstration and accuracy practice. And then on the weekends, we would drive up to an actual drop zone that had an airplane, just because the helicopter can only lift so many people so high depending on the day, and it's a lot less efficient. So that's where then we would go. We called it the ranch. That was the name of the drop zone. We'd go up to the ranch on the weekends and jump there.
That's not scary at all. Did you ever get injured or something?
I tore a ligament in my hand once in a completely preventable accident. And then I pulled my reserve one time. But that was it.
How about you, Mark? Did you get injured wrestling?
Oh, yeah. My shoulders are
destroyed.
My shoulders, I only did 2 years because my shoulders blew out at the end of my sophomore year, and they are still absolutely thrashed.
Because people pull you through your arms?
Yeah, it's a little bit of that and more that there are a lot of moves in wrestling that are really focused on moving the arm in a way against the joint that it's not supposed to move, and that generates
so
leverage and also like creates a lot of pain. And so it makes people like more willing to cave into the move. But that amount of leverage, when you send it, it just like repeated like strains and tears. Eventually things just kind of fall apart.
Damn.
So then you did the most logical next move and became an infantryman.
Right. Yeah. That was the next idea. I was like, okay, well, I'll just go do the next hardest thing I possibly can.
Why not? We're already here.
It makes sense to me. Now it's my knees that hurt.
Oh, jeez.
That's so cool. How about you, Bryson?
Yeah, so Bryson Porterfield here. I was gonna go the sports track, but I think you guys got that handled. Like mine's like standard, like, oh yeah, soccer, tennis, like play the things. But I would say something that most people don't know about me until it just kind of comes out is that I have been playing piano since I was in kindergarten, and also can sing, but I don't really let that come out unless like I'm like, having a good time at a bar, and then I'm just like belting out. And then people get shocked, and I'm like, oh, like I don't really try to showcase it too much. It's just a hobby of mine.
I feel this is one thing that I have seen that stays hidden for so many people. I would just randomly walk into someone's room and I'm like, you play the drums? Yeah. You play the piano? I was checking into an Airbnb with a friend. There was a piano there and he just starts playing beautifully Beethoven and stuff. I was like, I have never heard from you that you can play the piano. We have been traveling for the last 3 weeks. This is our fourth Airbnb, and that's when I'm getting to know this. Yeah. Because obviously we have the risky business, right? Which is the band of Ross. So we know people in the band that can play. But there's so many things. I think this is something that just stays hidden.
Yeah. I think a lot of artists or like musicians, if it's not like their everyday job, they don't really like to share it too much. I don't know why.
It does seem like a very private, almost like intimate thing that people keep to themselves. It's really interesting.
I couldn't tell you why I don't really share it too much. I think it's because actually once people know, they kind of want you to do it all the time.
Yeah, I think part of it too is like access. Like people don't just casually have pianos lying around, kind of. Whereas like wrestling, it's like, well, do you want to do this at the bar, right?
Exactly. You walk into a cafe, there's a guitar lying there, and you have a friend who can play guitar. Like, pick it up. With that, the ice has melted, I guess. So we can start with the episode. So first question from my side would be, at each of the events, Story Lab, VETX, OutX, whichever event you spoke in, or any other event that you attended, was there any specific takeaway for you that you would like to share with our listeners? We can start with you, Mark.
Yeah, I'll get it opening. I guess the thing that struck me about these various stories is that everybody has a unique story, but at the same time, somebody else in your community probably shares a similar story to you. And so whatever, like mine was about adversity and overcoming challenges and turning that into some life lessons. But what I realized having gone to some of these events is that although my story is unique, there are a lot of people that have had a similar type of experience in one way or another. And so you're never really alone in this world. There's always somebody that can relate somehow.
That's beautiful. How about you, Christian?
Yeah, I think, I talked in the last episode about how I had been kind of wrestling with trying to parse meaning from, or parse an understanding of what I had been feeling coming out of the Army, and realizing that the structure and the environment that had been so instrumental to what I thought was my happiness in those years, to suddenly have that gone, it just felt extremely lonely and confusing. And I think there's a lot of smiles that don't really mean happiness around Ross. Sometimes, like, a lot of people are putting on a brave face, even though a lot of people are going through a lot of stuff at any given time. There was a lot of validation leading up to VETX in that I was able to kind of bounce this idea off friends who said, yeah, you're on to something there. I think what meant a lot to me was getting feedback both from vets who continued to see a lot of overlap between their feelings and what I'd expressed, but also just talking to folks that had no prior exposure or involvement with the veteran community to take that idea that I talked about and see a lot of themselves in it. I think that was ultimately something I was going for, was trying to kind of bridge that gap, and to see. It felt like I had successfully done that, and that really meant a lot to me. It made me feel very validated and seen in that moment.
Yeah, I can totally relate with that, because I heard your story, and for me also it was like I was also moving from one environment to another, which was more chaotic.
Yeah.
And it was something very similar to that.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it, again, continues to mean a lot to hear that others, it resonated with them and it landed, because I think that's the biggest fear of doing one of those events, is you get up there and say something and then, well, it's just me. Okay, cool. No one else? Damn it. Rats. Yeah. Try again.
Actually, my takeaway would actually kind of come off of that, with that fear piece of it, where, there's so many things that are just very scary to do. But I think what I've learned from sharing my story at Story Lab is, if something scares you, just lean in, because you're going to learn a lot about yourself through that process. But
you're
then
onto something there.
Right. Yeah.
Exactly.
And then also you kind of show yourself hey, you could do anything that you put your mind to. So I think that's something that I kind of took away and tried to encourage others. If it scares the living hell out of you, just lean in. I promise you, you'll walk away from it really happy that you did it. And somebody else will probably come up to you and say thank you for doing that, because I, resonate with your message, or I connect with it, or, now I want to share my story. And who knows, maybe we get to then listen to that person's story and then realize something new about ourselves, right? Mm-hmm. It's a continuous circle.
I sense that all of these stories were about adversity, and you shared these stories on a big stage, which takes a lot of courage. But why do you think that these conversations are not part of our normal lives, like our everyday lives? Or are you able to actually talk about adversity and some pretty bad experiences, negative experiences of your past with the people around you?
I mean, me personally, I love to be an open book and very transparent. I don't know if that's like a bad thing or anything like that. Like maybe I'm like sharing too much, but I feel as though the more stories you share and the more connections you're able to make. Now, why don't others feel doing it? Maybe they just don't feel comfortable or they weren't raised in an environment where that's kind of accepted to share such vulnerable stories or things of that nature. So I don't know. That's just where my initial thoughts are.
Yeah, I would agree that I think comfort with the stories is a little bit either on the end of the receiver or on the end of the deliverer. Like the appropriate level of comfort between the two people needs to be kind of matching. And I feel like that, real or not, doesn't happen very often, just because of like what you think about the person or the person thinks about you or what you think that person thinks about you. I feel like that comfort level doesn't naturally kind of come into play, like Bryson is saying. I think one of the other things too is the topics that we discussed don't really come up in organic conversation. Like it's not like I'm just like casually having a conversation with somebody and then we're going to pivot to mental health kind of thing. Like that's not really a typical conversation topic.
Not on the resume.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Definitely not on the resume. So I think having kind of like a deliberate platform of like, hey, people are going to talk about some things. They may be uncomfortable things, but that walking in that it's going to be uncomfortable, challenging, a little bit difficult. And I think that was kind of one of the opportunities that VEDx presented for me was an opportunity to tell that story in a way where people were at least a little bit more prepared or expecting something really tough to come out of my mouth.
Interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I think kind of summarizing it, but trust, I think, is inherently lacking in a lot of situations, especially in front of strangers or among strangers. I don't think anything that I said on that stage were things that were unknown to my spouse or my friends or, people that were really looking or really involved along the story that I told as I was experiencing it. I don't think there's any shockers in what I said, but simultaneously there's a lack of willingness to trust the new people around me to bring them along for what is an actively ongoing journey, which is, what I kind of talked about, this ongoing transition. And so, I think that was one of those points where I had hoped that there would be a silver lining or some meaning behind sharing that with other people, and also potentially a way to raise awareness on behalf of a community that I identify with very strongly, but also doing it in a way that doesn't further differentiate it from the society that they're trying to assimilate into. So trying to build that trust, show that it's okay to go out on a limb and put voice to the emotions that most of us are experiencing and look at the common ground that comes up as a result.
Yeah, for sure. I think I agree with a lot of that. And an interesting thing that, Bryson, you mentioned was that some people just grew up in a very different environment. And that environment did not allow them to perhaps share their internal experiences or thoughts as often. I was talking to a few international students out here and they do not speak up as much in class. And what their thought process was or where that came from was that in their country, probably the family structure is such that you are not supposed to speak up in front of your elders. So that habit just never got inculcated. So it just stays with them. So people are not able to share those things still, even in a class scenario where you are not sharing your internal thoughts or experiences, but you are sharing something on a case or being part of a discussion. Right. But I think something like that just lingers on. And I totally agree with you, Mark and Christian. Like, totally we need a very supportive environment to be able to share these stories. We need to feel comfortable and safe to be able to share your internal thought process, because we do not want to walk out of a conversation feeling judged or consumed by sharing our own story when we were trying to add value to probably the community here.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
On that note, before joining Ross, all of you had a different set of experiences. But how did each of your unique journey and your set of expectations lead you to Ross? How did you decide to come to Ross based on your experiences?
Yeah, so my journey was a little bit of a trial and tribulation. I had gotten waitlisted from round one, and because of how the Marine Corps works, I basically had to tell the Marine Corps in January, I'm getting out of the service, but I didn't have an admission to a business school yet. And so I kind of hit a crisis button moment where I was like, oh my God, like, what do I do with myself now? Like, do I leave this thing that I enjoy behind, or do I and take the risk? Do I stick with it and miss out on the Ross opportunity? So there was a lot of kind of torment, I guess, for about 2 weeks while I made that decision. Eventually just sent my papers in to the military and said, I'll figure it out somehow and otherwise. And then Ross called a month later.
Burn those boats.
Yeah. Ross called a month later and said, oh yeah, don't worry about it. You're in. I was like, why'd you put me through that? And then Ross just happened to be, it was the best school I got into. And so that was a big coloring kind of component in my mind at the outset. Mm-hmm. But having now come here, what I'm realizing is that the community at Michigan and Ross in particular feels a lot like what I experienced in undergrad at USC. Mm-hmm. And I loved my undergrad experience. And so I am very glad that I wound up choosing Ross against any other option that could have popped up.
Awesome. We can send a note to AdCom.
Yeah, exactly. The military guys have a long timeline. Please let them in early.
Round ones only.
How about you, Christian?
I think a lot of my experiences along the way to Ross and just like other milestones that helped set me up for this opportunity, a lot of them have kind of been the result of decisions that are fairly emotional in nature in the moment. And it's tended to work out really well up to this point. So I'm trying to like trust that process. But I mean, you know, I got into Ross, and Ross was the school that I got the least help applying to, right? I was leaning super hard on friends at other programs to try and do everything in my power to build the best possible profiles with each of the adcoms of the other schools I applied to. And Ross was the one that I didn't pull favors. I did minimal networking. I felt like I painted the most holistic and truthful picture of who I was as a person. And it paid off. And once I was in, Ross was described to me as the best program for parents, as a father of a 2.5-year-old that definitely mattered to me, like being able to be involved in my family's life still, providing opportunity for my spouse to work while I was here, all of those things weighed in. So it was just, there was this really serendipitous moment when I got in where I didn't expect Ross to kind of sink its teeth into me in the way that it did early on in the process. But, I got my admissions call when I was changing a diaper, right? If it hadn't been any clearer to me, this is going to be the place that's going to let you still have your life outside of the academic environment and be involved in your personal life, that was a moment for sure. And I think, being able to kind of lean into the emotional attachment to the place and then have it reciprocated in a logical way continues to, I think, prove to me why this was the right fit.
Mm. I think that's a shout out to the quality of the application than the quantity of effort that you put behind it. I think it was similar to my experience. I had an admissions consultant that was helping me with the essays and stuff. And Ross was the only school that I did not take help from my admissions consultant on. Basically, my sister was reviewing my essays, and I think that's how I was able to put together a very authentic application. Mm-hmm. How about you, Bryson?
Well, I shared in the first episode that I am a double Wolverine or double blue. So I went here undergrad, and my journey for MBA is a very long one. I would say, after graduating undergrad, I kind of had the sense that I was going to go back to school and most likely obtain my MBA, but I just knew I needed some experience under my belt. So took some years there. And then back in 2020, I applied and got in nowhere. So that was if people could see Mark's face right now, that's exactly how I felt. Very okay, geez. Apparently it was, one of the hardest, application seasons because everybody was trying to go back to school. pandemic, all the things. And I then took that as kind of like a challenge, like, no, I'm going to do what I said I was going to do in my essays. Wanted to pivot into marketing, was in healthcare. So I did just that and go into an ad agency as a account manager. And then I was like, no, I'm still wanting some more experience here. So I applied again, actually, through the schools that I was looking at. Michigan was always there because it's my alma mater and I have love for it, but I didn't necessarily have it high. And it's because I wanted something different. Like I knew the experience of Ann Arbor and the culture, and I loved my undergrad experience, but I just wanted something different. And as I was visiting all these schools, I always felt like I was holding back at the other schools. But here I was excited. Like you get those goosebumps. And like, I was like, I want to talk to the admissions office more. I want to talk to the people. I want to go to the events. Like my mom's like, please stop going to these events. Like you've been so many times. Like you know what it's about. Like I don't understand. So after getting the call that I was in, by that point, it already raised to like my number one. And I was like, well, I'm going back. I was very nervous though, because I didn't know whether or not my undergraduate experience and my graduate experience were going to be different and feel different. I can attest that they do feel different, but they both are like uniquely like positive in their own right. So yeah, that's how I got here and all of that.
Congratulations, you all. You have made it to Ross.
Yes.
Took an act of God, but here we are.
Really, seriously.
This episode is sponsored by the Ross School of Business at the University of Michigan. Through our podcast, you can connect with the people and experiences that define the Ross way. Check out our other podcasts, such as Working for the Weekend, an exploration of the part-time MBA experience, Business and Society, a business podcast with award-winning Michigan Ross faculty, and Down to Business, a new interview series with Ross alum in the C-suite, hosted by Dean Sharon Matusik. All podcasts can be found on Apple Podcasts and Spotify.
I want to talk a little bit about what your expectations were and what the reality was when you came to Ross, and if there was a particular moment when you felt challenged or triumphant at Ross.
Expectations coming in, I mean, it sounds so half-assed, but like expectations were probably pretty low on my part because I didn't know what fully to expect, right? I knew that my undergraduate degree alone was not going to be enough to deliver the type of job and quality of life that I wanted for my family coming out of the military. And so I think I viewed this as a necessary means to an end and a really exciting opportunity, but I don't fully, I showed up not quite knowing what I wanted to be when I grew up, when I got here. And that was something I had to figure out pretty early on last year. I think as far as, challenges and triumphs, I faced a lot, as does everybody, but, applying for my internships last year, the amount of rejections that I got in one very concentrated period of time, I'd never had that many people say, no, sorry, you don't have what it takes to join us here. That was rough, to get that direct shot of constant rejection. And so I think my ultimate triumph last year was finally getting the nod that I wanted. I got 3 different offers for internships last year, and it was that third one that came in, which was the one that I really wanted and the one that I worked the hardest for. That I think that was that ultimate triumph because it set me up last summer to have an absolute blast. And it was everything I wanted it to be. So I would say that was definitely the triumph of figuring out as I was getting my feet wet here, figuring out what I was going to be when I grew up and then actually doing it. That was huge.
Congratulations on that.
Yeah, thanks.
But how did you get through that? Who do you bank on in these events when something bad happens, when there's something challenging?
On a personal side, definitely my wife. Yeah. Again, I think I said this in the last episode, but my wife being a therapist, she's got an emotional intelligence that I do not possess, but it's, invaluable in helping me through moments of adversity. And she did a lot of lifting, both in terms of how hard she worked last year as a sole breadwinner, but also just emotionally supporting and helping me through, those periods of just feeling like I had made this massive mistake getting out of the military and feeling like all I was good for was going back. There were some real lows there. So I credit her on the personal side 100%. I think with respect to Ross, Amy Keenest in the CDO was huge for me. Like, I showed up and said, hi, I'm a vet who wants to pursue opportunities in automotive. And she's the mobility industry rep, as well as tech and some others. But like, she has a soft spot for vets, I later found out. And she was really stoked to find somebody that actually wanted to stay local and get into something other than banking and consulting. So where some of my peers might have been fighting with each other to like book time with CDO reps, I mean, I would throw 30 minutes on her calendar and then email her about it. And 2 days later, we're sitting there and she's just throwing resources at me, like more resources than I had time to adequately handle and take advantage of. So grateful to have had her to, essentially hold my hand through that process and make me feel like my best interests were being taken care of and individually monitored by somebody else. It definitely was a huge weight off for me.
Yeah. Speaks to the support that we have here at Ross for
Absolutely.
recruiting. And going back to the point from our previous episode, just banking on our loved ones because they want to see you succeed and they want to see you happy as well. And we should always be comfortable sharing
Totally.
all our problems, all our challenges with our loved ones. Who wants to go next?
I think when I think about like my expectations, when Christian said means to an end, that really hit with me. I had a really fun undergraduate experience and then had decided not to use my chemical engineering degree and joined the Marines. And Christian can probably attest to this as well, is that the amount of fun that you have in the military gradually decreases over time. It's like a depreciation curve. You're just not quite sure when yours is going to fully depreciate to zero salvage value. Yeah. And so I had kind of depreciated to that like zero salvage value kind of thing. And I was like, all right, like the military is probably going to be the most fun experience of my entire life. Whatever comes after this probably is not going to be particularly fun. It's just a means to an end and a way to keep pushing in my mind. So when I came to Ross, I kind of told myself like, all right, books, job. That's it. That's the only thing we will do here. And I was pleasantly surprised to discover that there is a lot more to Ross than books and recruiting. It takes a little bit of balance to know like how much of each you really want to do. Mm-hmm. So that was, I guess, a unique challenge that I faced. But I remember John Brown at the beginning of the semester. He had been kind of a voice of reason throughout the entire application process at Ross. And at the beginning of the semester, he said to me, look, you're going to have your academic life, your social life, your personal life, like personal health, and your recruiting life. And it's a 4-legged stool. And you can either chop off all of the legs and still have a stable but much shorter stool, kind of unfulfilled, or remember that a 3-legged stool can still stand on its own. And sometimes you have to put one away and pick one up and put another one down and pick one up. And that was unbelievably invaluable advice for me to realize I have certain needs in each of those kind of 4 different lifestyles, and understanding like I don't have to do all 4 at the exact same time. Like some days, there was a day where I was like, you know what? I'm not doing class. I'm not taking any coffee chats. I'm not doing any interview prep. I'm not going to go to class. I'm just going to take care of my personal health, and I'm going to go have fun tonight. Like I'm going to work out and I'm going to go to the bar, Skeeps on Thursday. So, that was a rare occurrence, but it did happen. And I think that was one of the interesting things for me that kind of defied my expectations for myself in this place, which I guess coming to the challenge and triumph was figuring out what that balance is, because I hadn't touched a school book in 6 years or something like that. So understanding, okay, how much school do I need to be focusing on? How much, do I have time to work out today kind of thing? How much of this needs to be interview preparation? How much of this needs to be, whatever it is. So figuring out that balance. And I think a lot of the MBA ones felt the same way about finding balance.
It takes some time to get unhinged from what your expectation was or what your plan was, what you'll be doing at Ross or in your MBA, and there's so many things happening. And then the MBA becomes so much about finding yourself, having fun, building connections, building friends, all of those things. And then you do have to manage all of those things. John Brown actually illustrated that in a very good way. He's an EP on this podcast. He has never shared that on the podcast.
He's a pretty smart dude. You should ask him about that one.
I'm sad about that.
Mine is actually probably very similar to Mark, but in terms of expectations, I think I'm on TikTok way more than I need to be, but you always hear, right?
Most of us are. Don't worry. Most of us
Right. You always hear, if, for those of you listening who are considering going to obtain your MBA, you always hear, oh my gosh, 2 years off, like, don't have to work if you're in corporate America, kind of like a break. It's going to be so much fun. And not to say that it's not fun, but man, it is a lot of work.
I was lied to.
No, seriously. That's how I feel sometimes waking up. But it goes back to that balance, right? And like figuring out what you want or need to do today and chopping off one of those legs. So that way you have just 3. If I'm being completely honest, I'm still challenging with this on a day-to-day basis. Like even today, like waking up, I'm like beating myself up because I'm not really doing as much as I say once was last semester. And one of the legs, which was like leadership. I'm a section president, and the past couple of weeks, like just been going through a lot personally and through my health. And I just haven't been kind of pouring into that role, but I'm beating myself up for it. And I know I need to give myself grace. And that only 3, pegs could be up at once. But just kind of like reminding myself of that, and also keep practicing it. I will also say that, another challenge that I'm still working through is having a partner here. So my boyfriend moved here. He's working remotely, trying to have a fulfilled experience. And you probably can attest to this, Christian, like having a full experience, getting to do everything you want to do within your MBA, but then also making sure that your relationship is healthy and moving in a direction that you plan on moving forward towards, taking out the MBA, right? Like had that may not been here, what progression would we have been in our relationship? And it's definitely taken a hit where I'm not being able to really be there for my boyfriend as much as I want to, or we don't get to spend as much time. And it's just another thing that I have to kind of somehow bake in outside of school and recruitment and leadership and like all the things. So I'm still working on it. If I'm being completely honest, it's just a challenge, but I find moments where I'm able to have small triumphs where I'm like, oh, well today, like just to Mark's point, I decided not to do anything. And I just had a full day with my partner. Like, we just watched movies all day, which was great, but it's just every day, taking it one day at a time.
Yeah, I think, again, going back to the point, I think this is a 4-legged stool. And we did talk about giving ourselves grace last episode, but we also acknowledged that perhaps it gets very hard at times because you also mentioned TikTok. And I was also thinking that there are a lot of externalities, right? We want to give ourselves grace, but there are so many things happening around us. We want to fix the stool, put a nail in there, but that we don't have a hammer. We cannot use our hand to do it, for example. But similarly, like we were talking about our appearance as well, because we judge ourselves the worst when we look at our pictures, for example. For example, there's a picture of me and my partner in my room, and I always say that I'm looking so bad, you're looking great. And she says that I'm looking so bad, you're looking so great. So that just happens. Yeah. And I think social media is also one of the externalities, and so is probably the social life in our MBA compared to our personal self. Mm-hmm. Is there a challenge that you face in your social life here at MBA? Or if not, what would an ideal supportive environment look like for you? Or everything is perfect, and what do you like about the environment here? Anything works.
I would say I'm not necessarily experiencing this, but I have friends who are. So I'm going to try my best to speak from their voice.
For sure.
But Ross is a very heavy partner school. I think the statistic is something around like 46 or 40, something like that, very high, where the students are in a relationship or in families, which is great because there's a strong community there. But then there are people who aren't in relationships and are single who may have a challenge trying to find their circle of people. Speaking from specifically like the Black community, there's a good amount of us who are in relationships, and there's only like a couple small handful who aren't, and they often feel like they don't know where they can kind of come together with people that look like them to find that kind of those social things to do. They may look at, say, someone like me who's in a partnership and say, oh, Bryson is probably too busy. I'm not going to reach out to her because she's probably wanting to hang out with her partner. On one hand, yes. On another hand, I want to also get to know them and build friends. But I think they have struggled and been challenged to find their like little niche of, a community and figuring out where they can go or feeling included in that way where they're being invited out to parties and things like that. So for me, I always try to make it a point to always invite people when I can, people who are single, people who are not. But just speaking from their experience, I know that they've struggled with that, but finding people who are wanting to always bring you in no matter what your circumstances is definitely, that's the lens that I've been trying to put out. And I know that they have been very appreciative of it thus far. So that's all I can really add. Outside of that, for me, I've been loving my life socially here. So I can't really add much more to the challenging part, but yeah.
I think depending on who you ask, I may be enjoying my social life a little bit too much here, but that's a different kind of problem.
You're absolutely thriving.
In my element, as it were. We love state schools. No, what I think of like a supportive environment, I think Ross has been actually unbelievably good to me about this. From like giving the VEDX speech and people not really changing their opinions of me as a person, just being like, wow, that was an incredible speech, all the way to closer knit friends that know kind of when I'm a little off kilter and know when I'm kind of like on my ball a little bit. And they also are really able to read like, this guy needs somebody to be like, check in on him and make sure he's okay. Vice like when I'm off kilter and they know like, it's just like a day, he'll be okay kind of thing. Like the very close friends that I have here read me like a book and they know me stone cold. I talked about finding your home in our last episode. And I think that has really made this place feel like home is when people can just look at you and instinctively know that they're having a great day. They're having a terrible day. Do I need to intervene? Do I need to not intervene? Like having people that are able to read that makes me feel like this is the inclusive community in the home that I need and want.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, that all resonates. I think like for me, I think an ideal supportive environment is one where the interpersonal exchanges don't differ based on the environment, based on the physical setting, right? Something that I learned last year was that I, at least at the start, was significantly more transparent and upfront with who I was as a person than a lot of my classmates who treated classrooms kind of like they might a professional environment. And my section will tell you I like to participate in class. I mutter under my breath. I'm sarcastic. Like I enjoy participating. That's how I learn.
Yeah.
But I also I enjoy connecting with people regardless of the setting. And I hope that those connections are authentic and, I'm getting to know somebody's true self. So, I had a section mate who was a pretty closed book in class and then met them in a social environment, like we were at the bus or something, and it was like a different person. And that really put me through a loop when I first experienced that because my previous professional environment, I was the exact same person that I was at home. Maybe at home I'd tone it down a little bit, but there was a lot of carryover between the different environments that I found myself in. So I think the way that I've been able to kind of rectify some of those differences, and something I would encourage other people to do, is finding ways to connect with that really small group of individuals that you vibe with for whatever reason, and do it in a setting that is away from Ross, that is not a Ross endorsed function. Like Ann Arbor's a cool town that exists beyond Main Street. Like there's a lot of really great stuff. For fear of people finding my spots, I'm not going to share. But, every single Friday, a close group of friends that I've built entirely here, we get together. We call it dad beers. But I mean, every single Friday, it's 3 to 4 of us. We're all vets. We're all dads. And we get together and we have lunch and we have a pitcher of beer and we barely talk about school, and we just like connect on the life that it exists outside of this place. And so I think, it's a ideal supportive environment in that we can get away from this place and not have it occupy our lives at all times. But also it's an ideal and supportive place in that I've been able to find those connections and then go do things that matter to me, like meeting with my friends who have more of that shared experience with me, and being able to just kind of take comfort in that.
Yeah, I definitely would say that it's interesting. I mean, I think at any school you go to, the MBA bubble is real. And
so real.
Yeah.
Like you kind of forget that like life is obviously happening outside of it. And when you're like put in situations where you're actually remove yourself, or say you go home for the holidays and you're around family and you're like listening to the conversations that they're having and you're like, oh yeah, like that's a thing. Like
it still exists.
Yeah.
But it's so enriching, right?
Yeah. So those moments are nice to have. Definitely need to do more of those for myself, but yeah.
Yeah, the what you were saying about dad beers also definitely resonates. I know for me, the same thing has happened where it's like find little traditions that are not like part of the Ross experience. Like Bus on a Saturday is a Ross experience and it's awesome.
Amazing.
But it is not getting away from Ross by any means.
Right.
And so building little traditions, whether it's like once a month, once a week, whatever it is, with whoever it is, be it in the school or out of the school, I found that has been pretty important too. Feeling included as well.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Having talked about the expectations versus reality and what the expectations were, whether they came through or not, whether you were challenged, whether you were triumphant, all of those things, we all built a plan. We all had expectations coming in. Do you think that it is a good idea to build a plan coming in? If yes, then how should the prospective students think about it? And what other advice would you give to prospective MBAs?
Well, the thing I'm going to start with immediately is come to Ross. That's it.
Yes,
bar none. That's the advice. But having thus decided to come to Ross, because that is the only choice, to your question, I would say it's good to have a plan coming in.
Yeah.
But there's two very popular expressions in the military. One is go do a 70% plan now, then a 100% plan later, which kind of speaks to like, okay, develop 70% of the plan and execute as soon as you show up rather than having this really long, complicated built out plan that you have to build over time. The other one that's really popular in the military that Mike Tyson said is everybody has a plan until you get punched in the face, which is exactly what happens in the first week that you show up.
Oh my gosh.
You get socked so hard. It's like a roundhouse to the head kind of thing. And when that happens, you need to be able to audible your plan and be like, okay, we came in here, we had a good idea. It's still a pretty good idea, but we need to make a lot of adjustments to manifest this good idea.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's really helpful advice.
No, it is. I mean, I think there's a lot to say behind that first week. That's a transition. Yeah. Like that is like, I don't know. You think you kind of, for those who've gone, obviously to undergrad, you get syllabus week, the first week is kind of easy, your transition. No, you hit the ground running. Like you literally start day one and they're like, okay, so this is exam dates, this, that, and the third. So here's the content. And they just start and you're like, your head is spinning. You're like, I literally just unpacked my bags. My apartment is still a mess. Like you just full force ahead and so many events are happening. So many like programs are just being thrown at you and to Mark's point, if you have something concrete, you're like, okay, I think I'm going to come in and I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. It might not go that way. And you have to be okay with that and pivot where you can. And also, like, get some rest. Like, I didn't take rest. Like,
maybe some therapy, whatever.
Yeah, like, do what you need to do to make sure that you are healthy because it's just nonstop going until you tell yourself that you need to calm down. If you don't tell yourself that you need to calm down and like take the moments that you need to, your body will let you know. And then
as will the people around you.
Right. And then you're left with no other choice but to slow down. So all the things are going to be there. Don't worry. It's not going to like disappear. You will have a moment, whether it's in your first year or your second year, to have your experience. So just being adaptable is definitely something I would encourage people coming into an MBA program. Be adaptable.
Not be rigid. 70% plan is good and adapt once you're here. What do you think, Christian?
Yeah, I think like to Mark's point, leaving some room to do it on the fly, I think is huge. But like mentally and being able to quickly pivot, right? I showed up thinking that I was going to pursue a rewarding career in tech. And then about 2 weeks after our class started, like tens of thousands of tech workers are getting laid off on a daily basis. And it was like, well, I don't have plan B. Shit. What now? And so it kind of turned into, how do I take that interest or take that passion, and how do I start pursuing that along a different course? So it's kind of a dual-edged thing. I think when I started, I wish I'd had a little bit more specificity about what I might have wanted to do instead of what I read I was supposed to do. But I'm also glad that I didn't have it so figured out that I was trying to adhere to this rigid plan, because like that just sets yourself up for so much disappointment. I think the other key piece of advice, which was kind of my MBA to New Year's resolution, was learning to say no and not have to explain why you're saying no for something, right? Saying I don't want to, like that is a perfectly good explanation. And there's a lot of pressure to participate. There's a lot of pressure to show up and look and act and be a certain way in a lot of different settings. And quite often, if you take a second to take a knee and think about it, you're going to realize that it's just shit you don't want to do. And being able to be very, very selective about what I choose to participate in this year without feeling, or while also feeling less guilt about it, has been very liberating in a way. It's freed up a lot of mental and actual time and space to, care about what actually matters the most.
Yeah. I feel like that also it's a growing, I guess, journey. Like when you find those moments where you're just like, no, I was doing this before because of FOMO. Like I wasn't doing it because I actually wanted to do it.
Yeah.
And when you actually feel like you could then say no or what have you and stand in that and be comfortable, you then can take that outside of when you graduate and start to really realize like, okay, wait, I never actually liked that. I just was doing that because my friends were doing it, or, and just different areas of your life that you're like, you then start to have more of a fulfilled life because you're doing the things that you want to do.
And also cutting away the things that you don't want to do. I mean, I think like this probably will resonate most with Mark as well, but I mean, so much of my past life was doing things out of a sense of duty to do them, principally due to the people that I worked with and that I was surrounded by, and the sense of obligation to show up for them.
Right.
And suddenly I'm in a place where it's far more permissive for me to say this group or this thing, this activity, whatever it is not my priority. Like I've been able to strip down my priorities to my wife and my daughter, if I want to strip it down to that level of simplicity, and then adhere to a plan that allows me to be fully dedicated to that. And when somebody asks why I'm not showing up, I can say because I didn't want to, and leave it at that. And I'm no longer expected to show up to something anyways, if I don't want to. And that's incredibly liberating, but also a huge exercise in patience and growth. It's a hard habit to shake, just doing stuff out of a sense of duty.
Yeah.
Club selection was exactly like that for me because, club
I had to
selection,
numerically limit the number of clubs I joined just because I realized like there's not enough time in my life, nor is there enough interest or, bandwidth up here to actually commit to that.
And they put like 100 tables out in the winter garden. You're just like walking, perusing. You're like, that sounds cool. That sounds cool. That sounds cool. And then at the end of it, you're like, that's a list of 10. I don't have time for that. What do I actually
and that's a lot of money.
care about? Which, like, to your point, is like a very quick realization of like, oh my God, that sounds cool, but it's not really what I want for myself. I know
what value is this adding?
Right. I know the 3, 4, 5 things that I really want for myself. All the rest of this is just like, cool people are joining it. Seems like a fun activity periodically, but it's not what I really want and need.
Yeah.
There is that introspection that is required before coming to Ross, and even when you come here at Ross, because as you all said, we get hit with a lot of externalities once we are here. So we land here in orientation, everyone is going to partying, and then suddenly everyone has gone on M-Trek, and then you're coming back to Ross, and then you're in classes. Suddenly now you're recruiting again. Once you're done with recruiting, everything feels like everything has ended in life. What do I do now?
Current sensation.
So there are so many cycles that we have. But all of this is such great advice. And I want to thank all of you for being here for another episode and sharing your thoughts and experiences with the entire Ross community. And we are really happy that you chose Business Beyond Usual as a platform to share those thoughts and experiences. And I think this is a wonderful addition to our list and wonderful contribution to the community out here at Ross. With that, we would like to close out this episode. Business Beyond Usual is brought to you by the Ross School of Business at the University of Michigan. Today's episode was produced by Arpit Sharma. Executive producers of BBU are JT Godfrey, David Amarim, John Brown, and Arpit Sharma. Special thanks to Jonah Brockman, who did our editing today. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time, go blue, and this is Business Beyond Usual.